Services are my supply.
Services? Well, what sort of services?
I bring back the dead.
You're traveling to another dimension. Your next stop, the Twilight Zone.
The Twilight Zone often blended genres to create something unique to the fifth dimension. The episode we'll be covering today, Mr. Garrity and the Graves, is one such example. Set against the backdrop of the Old West, this one is a mix of comedy, satire, and we even get a dose of horror, which is always a plus in my book. The question is, does this unusual mix hold up? Interestingly, this strange tale about a man who strolls into town claiming he can bring the dead back to life was actually based on a true story. Seriously. But we'll come back to that in a moment. For now, settle in and let's discuss Mr. Garrity and the Graves. This is episode 32 from season 5. It was written by Rod Serling and directed by Ted Post.
Introducing Mr. Jared Garrity, a gentleman of commerce, who in the latter half of the 19th century plied his trade in the wild and woolly hinterlands of the American West. And Mr. Garrity, if one can believe him, is a resurrector of the dead, which on the face of it certainly sounds like the bull is off the nickel. The place is Happiness, Arizona, the time about 1890. And you and I have just entered a saloon where the bar whiskey is brewed, bottled, and delivered from the Twilight Zone.
Veteran Twilight Zone director Ted Post was the right choice to helm this entry in the series. The atmosphere and mood feels genuine, and the aesthetic is very much in line with other TV westerns of the era. Post had an extensive career in film and television, but I think his experience actually directing many westerns really shines through here. And unlike earlier western-themed Twilight Zone episodes, such as Mr. Denton on Doomsday and The Grave, this one is lighter in tone.
Eureka!
And that's surprising considering our plot involves reanimating corpses.
The dead will be returned to you.
Our lead, as portrayed brilliantly by John Dehner, gets things started on a strong note. Garrity is as cool as they come. He makes an awesome entrance, instantly establishing himself as a confident, smooth-talking, charismatic peddler.
A magician, now he doesn't tell how he does his tricks, and I don't tell how I bring back the dead. But I do.
Sure, it's obvious from his sly smirk and cocky demeanor that Garrity is probably a con artist, but all the same, you can't help but wonder how this will all play out. Plus, Garrity's claim that he can bring back the deceased is intriguing because we're in the Twilight Zone, the one place where we can't rule out the supernatural.
I don't like the proceedings. I believe when you're dead, you're dead.
Another positive aspect of this episode is the setting, Happiness, Arizona.
Yeah, that's what she's called.
And what I really love is how the townsfolk make absolutely sure any visitors know exactly where they are.
Happiness, Arizona.
Happiness is plastered everywhere you look. And we soon learn from the overly talkative bartender there's good reason for this rebranding.
I tell you, mister, this town wasn't a fit place to live in. Wasn't a night you come in that door, you wouldn't have to step over a dead body. Why, there were more citizens biting the dust than there was attending Sunday services.
Happiness, Arizona.
Mr. Garrity and the Graves also serves as a spotlight for many of the character actors of the day. Pretty much all the players Garrity interacts with throughout the episode gets a moment to choose some scenery.
How's come he left his wagon?
Gooberman, you're a very embarrassing man to have around.
This offbeat little cast of goofballs give Happiness an oddball personality all its own.
As a public official of this town, I apologize for these men. I am humiliated.
But hands down, the standout here is Jensen, the chatty bartender, as played by Stanley Adams. When he's not snoozing, he's actually pretty lively and expressive. Adams certainly brings this character to life.
I do a little preaching on the side, too.
What is it?
Why, lovely lady, it's a tribble.
And with that, I may as well get into my obligatory Star Trek reference. Adams also played Cyrano Jones in one of the most popular Star Trek episodes, The Trouble with Tribbles. And he even returned to voice the same character in the animated series episode, More Tribbles, More Troubles.
Captain Kirk, friend Kirk.
Seal off the area, Ensign.
Okay, back to Twilight Zone. Naturally, Garrity's wild claims send shockwaves through the town. But all it takes is one quick demonstration. bringing a dog back to life after it's been hit by a wagon to convince everyone that Mr. Garrity is the real deal.
Look at him go!
Later, it's made even more clear Garrity apparently can bring the dead back to life when one of the recently deceased is spotted in a distance headed toward town. Now, you might assume the people of happiness would be happy to have their loved ones return. Nope, not at all. One by one, the townsfolk quickly decide the dead returning will severely complicate their current lives.
I never did care for Ephraim while he was living, and I don't see why I should go through it all again.
And this reaction from the townsfolk is exactly what Garrity was banking on.
I would hate to disturb Zelda's rest, so how much would it cost to put her back?
And all of these little reveals give us a peek behind the curtains of this town and its inhabitants. But it also gets us to a clever and humorous conclusion. Garrity cashes in. Everyone in the town basically requests that he put their loved ones back into their graves. This little twist, so to speak, is exactly how you go about subverting expectations. Most people who have suffered a loss would do anything to have their loved ones back. But here we have a tale where the exact opposite happens, and surprisingly, it works.
Oh, that's a very fine piece of deduction.
Now, I will say it was far-fetched that all of these people conveniently had massive wads of cash on hand, and all of them do seem gullible to a point of absurdity. But no matter what time you're in, people are vulnerable to being fooled by con artists. With that in mind, it makes sense that Garrity makes out like a bandit. And even more telling is the fact that he does so without firing a single shot, in a Western setting of all places.
Hallelujah!
In the closing moments of the episode, we see Garrity and his pal Ace headed out of town, joking about how their scam worked. Hell, even a little dog was in on this one.
You're a nice dog. I got a big bone in the wagon for you. Your reward for playing dead.
But one lingering question remains. Since this is the Twilight Zone, can Garrity actually bring the dead back to life? Well, apparently Garrity is more powerful than even he knows, because after he leaves, the dead literally rise from their graves.
The actor that played you wasn't worth a darn.
As Garrity rides off into the sunset, the people of happiness can now look forward to well over 100 grumpy zombie visitors.
Sometimes dead is better.
Exit Mr. Garrity, a would-be charlatan, a make-believe con man, and a sad misjudger of his own talents. Respectfully submitted from an empty cemetery on a dark hillside that is one of the slopes leading to the Twilight Zone.
Mr. Garrity in the Graves is easily one of the more offbeat and darkly comic episodes in the series. But I think the main reason I'd recommend this one is the performance of John Dehner as Jared Garrity. Dehner was a renowned character actor who worked on stage, radio, film, and in TV. He also appeared in 2 other classic Twilight Zone episodes, The Lonely and The Jungle. But in my view, Mr. Garrity in the Graves featured his finest performance.
The proof of the pudding, they say, is in the eating, and the proof of the service is in the performing.
He plays Garrity with just the right balance of charm and ambiguity. The entire time we're wondering if he's an actual miracle worker or just an old-school hustler.
Dog money pie.
Turns out he's both. Garrity actually reminds me of another one of my favorite hustlers, Slippin' Jimmy from Better Call Saul. Or you might even compare him to the charming schemers from The Sting. If there's one thing these types of characters thrive on, is running the long con. And it was great to see a story like this in the 5th dimension. Another interesting aspect of this one is that, unlike most Twilight Zone episodes, Garrity, who you could say is the villain, doesn't get his comeuppance. He rides off scot-free, and the townsfolk are left to face the Night of the Living Dead.
I can't wait to get back into town.
On that note, I mentioned early on that this episode was based on a true story. Well, there's an extensive account of how this one came about in Martin Grams Jr.'s Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic. Grams notes why this episode features a story credit from Mike Korologos. Korologos was a self-described starving sports writer for the Salt Lake Tribune. Korologos wrote an article which detailed the account of a mysterious stranger from 100 years prior who wandered into the small mining town in Alta, Utah, claiming to have Christ-like powers to resurrect the dead.
Well, that's what he said his line was, bring him back the dead.
Much like in this episode, the townsfolk eventually decided the dead returning would cause chaos, especially for widows and widowers who had remarried and those who had inherited property. Eventually, the townsfolk took up a collection of $2,500 and offered it to the stranger just so he'd get the hell out of town. Serling came across this story, fell in love with it, and purchased the rights. Mike Korologos received the story credit, which he was very happy about, and we ended up with a unique fifth dimension spin on a pretty wild historical event.
What did he say his name was?
He didn't say.
He's got a sign on his wagon. It says Garrity.
Obviously, I'm a fan of this episode, but it's not without its issues. In terms of criticisms, many viewers, including Mark Scott Zickery, have noted one glaring moment that really stands out: the unexplained vanishing man. This key moment in the episode, in which the townspeople believe they see the bartender's deceased brother returning from the grave before somehow vanishing, is simply unexplained. Now, I'm obviously one of the biggest Twilight Zone fans around, but even I needed an explanation of some sort for this moment. It's important because it's another key part of the con that convinces everyone to fork over their money. So you have to give me something. I'll write off the stunt as smoke and mirrors, but you have to at least acknowledge that there was some smoke and mirrors involved.
He disappeared. He just plain disappeared.
I still give the episode credit for pulling off a pretty dark premise. Serling did a nice job adapting the tale, including some unique additions, and giving it a signature fifth dimension twist.
But that there Garrity sure can do a job of resurrecting.
I'd give this one 3 out of 5 resurrected dogs. Thanks as always for watching, everyone. If you have your own thoughts on Mr. Garrity and the Graves, feel free to let me know in the comment section below. And also, if you enjoyed this review, hit that sub button, hit that like button, and hit that notification bell. Until next time, stay safe, be well, later.